If I told you that a single knock on my door one ordinary evening would shift the way I thought about my nights, you probably wouldn't believe me. I didn't believe it either. For years, my evenings had been wrapped in the same rhythm: quiet dinners, a book, sometimes the soft sound of the television filling the silence. Nothing remarkable. Nothing unexpected. But then my neighbor Elijah changed everything. What started as a small, seemingly innocent moment became something much deeper, something that made me see myself and him in a light I hadn't known was possible. Before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Are you sitting in a small town where the streets fall silent after dusk, or are you in a city where the glow of lights keeps the night awake? I always like to imagine the places where these stories land. That evening started like any other. I was 54, living in a modest but comfortable home I'd taken pride in keeping warm and welcoming, even if most nights it was only me who appreciated it. Across the street lived Elijah, a man I'd always thought of as simply my neighbor. We'd exchanged polite smiles, sometimes short conversations about the weather, or whether the leaves were falling earlier this year. I knew his name, of course, and he knew mine, but our lives had rarely overlapped beyond those passing gestures. The air that night carried a touch of autumn's chill, the kind that hints at winter, but still holds the sweet earthiness of fallen leaves. I just made myself tea, settling into my armchair, when I heard the faint sound of gravel crunching outside my door. At first, I thought it was a stray cat, but then came the knock. Steady, intentional. I opened the door to find Elijah standing there, his expression somewhere between hesitant and relieved, as though he had been debating with himself whether to even come over. His coat collar was turned up, his hair mussed a little by the evening breeze. "Julie," he said, his voice low and warm, "I hate to bother you at this hour, but would you mind if I came in for a bit? My power just went out, and I thought maybe I could wait it out here. I know it's an odd request." It was odd, but something about his presence didn't feel intrusive. Instead, it felt grounding. I stepped aside and motioned him in. We sat in the living room, my tea steaming gently between us. The quiet of the house seemed more alive with another person in it. Elijah looked around, almost as though he was trying to memorize the space. "You've made this place cozy," he said, his eyes tracing the shelves of books, the framed photographs, the lamp that cast a haunted glow across the rug. "It's my little sanctuary," I replied, suddenly aware of how much of myself was reflected in these walls. "I suppose it feels bigger when it's just me here." He smiled at that, soft, genuine. I know the feeling. Some nights, the silence in my house feels so heavy, I almost wish it would talk back to me. That confession stirred something in me, because I understood it. Loneliness wasn't new to me. It had been my companion for years, especially since my children had grown and built lives of their own. I wasn't unhappy exactly, but the nights did feel longer when there was no one to share them with. As the minutes slipped into an hour, our conversation stretched. What surprised me most wasn't the topics, family, work, small frustrations of daily life, but the ease with which we spoke. Elijah's voice carried a steadiness, but beneath it I sensed layers, things he hadn't shared with many people. His eyes, deep-set and thoughtful, lingered on mine when he spoke, making me feel seen in a way I hadn't expected. At one point, a gust of wind rattled the window, and the lights flickered, dimming before steadying again. Without thinking, Elijah reached out, his hand brushing mine where it rested on the arm of the chair. It was such a small touch, almost accidental, but it sent a quiet current through me. I didn't pull away. Neither did he. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, almost heavy with things unspoken. My heart picked up, and for the first time in years, I felt that forgotten thrill of possibility, a reminder that life, even in its later chapters, could still surprise you. We didn't move beyond that touch. We didn't need to. The night unfolded gently, layered with laughter, moments of reflective silence, and the kind of conversation that lingers long after it's spoken. I realized how rare it was to meet someone who could both ease the loneliness and spark something tender all at once. When Elijah finally stood to leave, the power at his place restored, he paused at the doorway. His hand lingered on the frame, and he looked at me with a softness I hadn't noticed before. "Thank you, July," he said. "Tonight meant more than you probably realize." As I watched him cross the street back to his house, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea still cooling on the table. That night, the quiet I had grown so accustomed to felt different, not emptier, but alive, as if the silence itself was holding on to the memory of what had passed. I didn't know where this would lead. But I did know one thing. My nights would never be the same again. The morning after Elijah's visit, my house felt different, as if the walls had learned a new way to hold the quiet. I made my tea and noticed how I paused before sitting, listening for footsteps that weren't there. It wasn't longing in the dramatic sense, just an awareness, like discovering a room you've always had but never opened. The chair across from mine, the one he'd used, had a small indentation in the cushion. I barely smoothed it out. I told myself not to read too much into one evening. People can drift into your life softly and drift out the same way, and I had taught myself to expect the tide, not the arbor. Still, I found my garden gloves and went out to trim the mums, wanting to move my hands through something steady. The air had that slight bite, the kind that makes your breath visible for just a moment, as if your thoughts are slipping into the world. When I straightened up, I saw him. Elijah was on his front steps, rolling paint over a patch of peeling wood. He looked up and saw me the same second. "Morning," he called, lifting the roller with a small salute. "Power's steady today." "Seems so," I answered, and surprised myself by walking toward the fence line. I stopped a polite distance away. The sun fell across his face at an angle that made me realize I'd never really looked at him in daylight, only in the amber wash of my living room lamp. He had that open, unhurried look some men get with time, as if the edges have learned how to soften without losing their shape. "Thank you again for last night," he said. "I brought something to say it properly." He set the roller down, disappeared inside, and came back with a little potted rosemary. "For your kitchen. It makes everything better. Potatoes, chicken, even the way the room smells." I took the plant and breathed in the resinous green. "That's kind of you." "Well," he said, almost shy, "kindness is the only thing that hasn't gone out of style." We spoke a few minutes. I learned he liked to walk just before sunset, when the light made the sidewalks look gentled. He learned that I prefer to cook too much food on Sundays because leftovers feel like a gift you give yourself. We left each other there, neighbors again, but not quite the same kind we had been. The week unfolded with small exchanges. On Tuesday, he returned my umbrella, which I had apparently left in the grocery store months ago without noticing. On Wednesday, I found a note tucked in my mailbox in a tidy, almost architectural hand. "Try this." It was a recipe for roasted carrots with honey and rosemary, with 2 lines penciled in at the top. "Turn the oven on early so the house warms. Eat while it's still a little too hot." That night I cooked it and laughed alone in my kitchen when I burned my tongue just enough to feel alive. Thursday brought rain. The kind that begins with a whisper and decides to stay, settling into the gutters with the confidence of a guest who knows your family. I read on the couch. The house breathed. At dusk, a soft knock sounded again. I opened the door to a halo of wet air and Elijah under the edge of my eave, rain stippling his shoulders. "I don't mean to intrude," he said, "but I wondered if you might like to try an experiment." He lifted a small, battered radio. "I found this in a drawer. It still catches the jazz station when the clouds are right." I stepped aside the way I had before, and he entered with his careful, almost respectful way of taking up space, like someone trained not to leave footprints on a clean floor. He shook his coat on the mat and set the radio on the windowsill. The lamp cast its familiar warm circle, and the room settled around us. He adjusted the dial. At first we got static and a preacher insisting on certainty. Then we found a saxophone, lazy as a cat, talking in blue notes. The rain added its brushwork against the glass. We both smiled. "What's the experiment?" I asked. "Hearing the night instead of seeing it," he said. "Sometimes I close my eyes and notice the small sounds. The kettle building, a car passing and disappearing, the way the floor sighs when the house remembers you're still here. It helps." "Helps with what?" "With not letting the dark make up its own stories," he said quietly. We sat in silence a moment. The music shaped the air between us. I realized how rarely I let myself simply be with someone without reaching for conversation like a handrail. He watched the rain and let the saxophone keep time with his breathing. "Can I ask something?" I said eventually. "You can ask me anything, Julie. What made you knock the first time?" He considered. I could see the answer gather in him and arrange itself into something gentle. "My power did go out," he said, "and I could have waited it out with a flashlight and one of those cold dinners that taste like the absence of heat. But I remembered that you kept your lamp on later than most nights. I thought, if I were brave, I'd ask to sit near a warm light. I didn't feel brave. But I was tired of my own quiet." "I'm glad you asked," I said, and I meant it with more of me than I expected. The radio drifted into a tune I recognized from years ago. Not a famous one, but the kind you associate with a room rather than a name. Elijah turned the volume down a notch. "This may be forward," he began, and then he stopped, giving the words space to breathe. "Would you like to stand with me? Not a dance exactly. More like letting the music have a body for a minute. Only if you want to." He didn't reach for me. He waited. I noticed how, even in the asking, he gave me every choice. I set my teacup down and stood, feeling the old shyness stir like a bird that thinks it forgot how to fly. He offered his hand, palm up, not assuming. I placed my hand in his. He looked at me for confirmation before he drew me closer. Everything about the movement was slow enough for consent to take root between us. We swayed. That's the only word. The kind of slow motion that requires no steps because the music is doing the counting. His shoulder was warm under my fingertips. The rain wrote its soft script on the window panes. I became aware of how long it had been since I'd allowed myself to be held in any way that wasn't an old memory replaying itself. At one point, he spoke softly near my hairline. "If anything about this feels wrong, you tell me, and we stop. Immediately. There's nothing we have to prove to anyone, especially the night." "It feels right," I said. "It feels like remembering something my body knew before my mind did." We did not rush. There was no precipice, only a gentle slope into quietness. The music ended, and we remained where we were for a breath that held more than air. When he eased back, he did it as if he were returning something he'd borrowed and cared for. My hand, my space, the moment itself. He smiled then, a little unguarded. "I'm out of practice," he admitted. "I never know if my instincts are old-fashioned or simply old." "Old can be lovely," I said. "It knows how to last." He looked like he was about to say something else when the lights flickered, once, twice, then went out. The room fell into a darkness that was not hostile, just complete. The radio surrendered the station and whispered into static. We both laughed, a small ripple of sound that made the dark feel less absolute. "Stay where you are," I said, feeling for the matches on the mantel. A second later, the first candle took, then another, and the room opened itself in golds and shadows. The rain outside grew confident. The house was all heartbeat. "Would you like dinner by candlelight?" I asked, surprised at the steadiness in my voice. "I have leftover roast chicken, and your rosemary is already working its magic on the counter." He hesitated, and I could see the manners in him hold up a sign that said "Don't impose." "Only if it's no trouble," he said. "It wouldn't be trouble. It would be company." We moved around each other in the kitchen like we practiced. He found plates and on his own set them where I always did, though he'd never watched me do it. I shredded the chicken and warmed it in a pan over the gas flame, added roasted carrots and a little honey, sprinkled rosemary like a promise. The candlelight made steam look like something holy. We ate slowly, as if speed might break the spell. We talked about nothing important and everything essential, what it was like to raise children who are now older than we feel, how the middle of the night can magnify both worry and wonder, the way certain songs can carry you back to rooms you haven't visited in decades. He told me about his marriage, not in a catalogue of grievances or losses, but as an honest story with a beginning, middle, and ending that taught him tenderness had to be practiced to stay fluent. I told him about the year after my divorce when I painted the living room 3 different shades of cream, because I couldn't decide who I wanted to be in it. After we finished, we didn't clear the plates right away. The rain slowed to a hush. The candles hummed. He glanced at my bookshelves and asked if I still read aloud to myself sometimes. "It's a habit of mine," he added, smiling. "When a passage is too good for silence, I give it a voice." "Show me," I said. He scanned the spines and chose a book that had been my companion in many winters. He opened to a marked page and began to read, low and even. The words filled the room with that particular fullness that comes when language wears its Sunday best. I watched his face as he read, the way he paused exactly where the sentence asked him to, honoring the author's breath. When he reached the end of the paragraph, he looked up. "Your turn," he said. I took the book and read the next section. My voice was softer at first, but it found its footing. We passed the book back and forth, letting each other keep the parts that felt like home. I realized suddenly, and then gradually, if that makes sense, that this was what I'd been missing more than anything. Not a performance, not a dramatic grand gesture, but the ordinary miracle of being witnessed in the small things. The power flickered back to life. The refrigerator hummed. The radio sputtered into a commercial for tires and weekday morning traffic. We both laughed again. "Well," Elijah said, "I suppose modern life insists on returning." "It does," I said, "but it can wait one more minute." We stood to clear the table together. He reached for a plate. I reached for the same one, and our fingers met, not by accident this time. We didn't pretend it was a coincidence. I curled mine around his lightly. He looked at me with that steady, asking gaze, and I nodded, not to a question he had spoken aloud, but to the truth we both understood. He lifted my hand and pressed it between both of his, a gesture that felt more intimate than anything dramatic could have. "May I kiss you?" he asked, as if he were asking to borrow a treasured book. "You may," I said. He kissed me the way a good listener hears, patiently, present, with room for breath. There was no rush, no claim, just warmth and the certainty that we were both choosing it. When we parted, the room had not changed, and yet it had. The lamp light, the quiet plates on the counter, the book half closed like a sigh. Everything looked exactly as it had, only clearer. He didn't stay late. That felt right. He put on his coat and stood at the door like a man remembering his hat in an old movie. "Thank you for tonight," he said. "For all of it. The music, the light, the food, the words. I don't want to hurry what doesn't want to be hurried. But I'd like to see you tomorrow, if you'd like that too. We could walk before sunset. Let the sidewalks do the thinking." "I would like that," I said. After he left, I turned off the lamp and stood in the doorway a while, the cool of the frame against my shoulder. The street glistened under the last sighs of rain. Across the way, his curtains glowed for a moment and then dimmed. A dog barked 2 blocks over. Somewhere, a teenager's laughter braided itself with the night. I felt all of it, not as a spectator, but as a person in the middle of a living neighborhood, part of the quiet and the noise. I washed the dishes because I wanted the warm water on my hands. I trimmed a sprig of rosemary and tucked it into a glass by the sink. I placed the book on the table, still open to the page where we'd left off, a place marker not just for our reading, but for the evening itself. Then I went to the bedroom and pulled back the covers. Before I turned out the light, I glanced at the empty chair across the room and didn't feel sad. I felt expectant, the healthy kind. The kind that leaves room for sleep and doesn't require rescue in the morning. Lying there, I thought about the word neighbor and how it had always sounded like an address more than a relationship. But tonight it felt like a verb, something you do on purpose. To be a neighbor, as it turns out, is to live near someone with your attention, not just your body. Elijah had done that, and in saying yes to it, I had too. I never imagined my nights would change at this stage of life. I thought I had already made peace with how they unfolded. A few familiar comforts, careful routines, the ritual of keeping myself company. But change doesn't only arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes on foot, carrying a rosemary plant and a radio that still finds jazz when the clouds are right. It asks permission. It waits for your answer. And when you say yes, it teaches your evenings how to breathe again. Tomorrow we will walk before sunset. The light will make our shadows longer than our bodies. We will notice porches we've passed 1,000 times and never really seen. We will talk about dinners we've loved and streets we've lived on, and what it means to keep learning after 50. Maybe we'll pick up a newspaper from a stand and argue cheerfully about the crossword. Maybe we'll come back to my kitchen and I will read, and he will listen, and we'll let the night take the shape of patience. And if the power goes out again, we'll know where the matches are.